It's unlikely that Jackson Carman will start for the beginning of the Cincinnati Bengals season, but what does the future hold for the Bengals second round pick? We'll break that down, plus some roster maneuvering in today's show.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, bringing you coverage of your Cincinnati Bengals every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less in their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your first entry. First-time users will get a 100% deposit match on up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Jackson Carman has been under a lot of scrutiny, James, throughout training camp, throughout the preseason, and rightly so. The former second-round pick had a rookie season to forget. And at the start of training camp, I don't forget this, Frank Pollock was talking Jackson Carman up. And I thought that was praise not delivered lightly. And maybe it was at the time. Maybe this COVID thing really threw a wrench into Jackson Carman's preseason. But at this point, the conversation that I have seen in the last 24 hours or so, last 2 days or so after that preseason game is, will the Bengals keep Jackson Carman? Will he be a surprise cut?
Yeah.
And thus the conversation. What does the future hold for Jackson Carman? And is there a way for him to turn it around? Remembering that he is relatively young. He comes from a very prestigious program at Clemson where he played on some very good teams. Was always seen as like a mid-round pick. Could have been a third-round pick if the Bengals didn't take him in the second round. Could have even been a late second-round pick, despite consensus being that at the time the Bengals reached on the pick. All of these things aside, he's likely to still be a Cincinnati Bengal after these initial cutdowns. And so we discuss the future.
It's tough because on one hand, and we've been very critical of Jackson Carman, and we should be, because he's been bad, right? And the body language sucks. It's awful. It's absolutely dreadful. And it's not like Billy Price where he gets his butt kicked and then you can see he's mad afterwards and doesn't want to talk because he's so mad at himself and mad at his performance and all of that. And I'm not saying, maybe Jackson Carman is mad at himself, but you don't see it. And when you don't see it, well, then there's nothing tangible. There's no evidence that we can go off of saying, man, he really cares. Especially when the head coach, Zach Taylor, is praising the guy who beat Jackson Carman out, a 4th rounder, not a 2nd rounder, a 4th rounder from a national champion, a 1AA school, right? Not Clemson. Not Florida State, not LSU, not whatever team you want to use, not Ohio State. I'll throw them in there because, man, Buckeye fans are about to come at my neck. The point is that part of it is really frustrating. The perceived, whether it's true or not, his lack of caring. But you brought it up sort of there, and I'm going to hammer it home right now. He's 22. And if there's any hope, that's the hope. Like, of course, Cordell Volson is more mature. Of course, Cordell Volson is more ready to go in the NFL. Of course, Cordell Volson, he spent 5 years in college because of the COVID year. He won 4 national titles. He's 24, not 22. He's not playing in his hometown where there are certain pressures, even though I think a lot of guys are built to withstand that. Sam Hubbard, there were no concerns there, right, of him playing in front of his hometown fans. But I will say that back-to-back years now, like at some point there should be a wake-up call. And maybe it's not going to happen with the Bengals. Maybe it's going to be when he does get released, because that's what's going to happen if he keeps going down this path. Maybe it isn't this year, or maybe it isn't this cut down, but that's what's going to happen. If Jackson Carman continues to just get beat like a drum against third stringers, against undrafted guys from Brown, which nothing against Brown or the Ivy League, Clemson stars shouldn't be doing that. And that's what happened in that Rams game. So that's the part of it where it's like, okay, it's been bad, very bad. He is 22. You do have Frank Pollock. But I wonder how long the leash is, especially if the perceived lack of caring is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
If the coaching staff feels that way. Now, again, on record, they haven't said that. They've said Jackson's working hard. He's improved, all of those things. Let's give you some Built Bar truth serum and see if Zach Taylor would say the same thing. Man,
what?
We're just adding things. We're just adding, man, a little truth serum.
Sure.
And so if that happened, would they say those things or not? That's a question that, well, we can only give to Zach Taylor, Brian Callahan, Frank Pollock and company if Built Bar creates a truth serum, which who knows? Maybe they got that going on right now.
I have totally forgotten anything I was going to say because of the Built Bar truth serum.
You're welcome.
I think that the thing is, if the Bengals coaching staff felt that he didn't care, we might see him released. I don't think the dead money, which has been bandied about as an explanation for why the Bengals would keep Jackson Carman, is a significant motivator for the Bengals to keep Jackson Carman on the roster. I don't feel like they have a whole lot of great options on the interior. I feel like if they felt they could get a guy that they felt good about being a backup guard, and I'm not saying they feel good about Jackson Carman being a backup guard. I truly don't know the answer to that question. They would be more apt to let him go. Maybe if Ben Brown doesn't get hurt and has a nice preseason, we're having this conversation much more seriously. Or maybe we're talking about Trey Hill instead. Although I think Trey Hill has shown some improvement in some areas, still an up and down preseason for him. When you're hearing this coaching staff, which we've heard for multiple years now, highly value consistency and character and passion for the game, talk about Cordell Volson this way. I've not once heard that sort of praise for Carman. The praise for Carman has been, when it's existed, it's been about him coming in shape and ready to go. And that's what we've heard from coaches about Carman, talking about him, doing some good things in generalities and vagaries, talking about him showing some improvement in some areas. Again, I think mostly pretty vague. I haven't seen the on-field progression from Carman. He's still jump setting a ton and losing those reps a ton. I wonder if he does that to his own detriment, despite it being a preference that he seems to have. You don't see it as much. I was talking to Mike at Bengals_San Santagata about this the other day on Twitter. Cordell Volson doesn't jump set as much. So is it a technique thing? Is it a mental thing? Is it a passion thing? Is it a character thing? Certainly all questions and not answers that we'll get from this coaching staff, at least on the record anytime soon. And so if they keep him, we'll have an idea of how they feel. If they cut him, we'll certainly have a clearer idea that maybe they do feel the way we think they do.
Yeah. And the thing is really, let's just look back at the past, let's go 4 years, right? 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, just the guys they've drafted. And I'm not going to go through each guy, but most of them, whether it's small school, Wyoming, Logan Wilson, big school, national champ, T. Higgins, obviously you got the 1st and 5th overall picks, but it's not just those guys. Like, they're all kind of cut from the same thing. What did I say after I interviewed Dax Hill? I was like, oh, this isn't going to be too big for him. He's a 31st pick. You don't know if he's going to be there or not. And yet I could see how he was going to fit in with a Jamar Chase, a Joe Burrow, an insert, whoever you want. Jackson Carman feels like the outlier from an attitude standpoint. And really, like over the past 3 to 4 years, like even Drew Sample, I know people are really critical. 2nd round, Drew Sample, agreed, right? Especially in the moment. He's got a great attitude.
The character is there.
Works really hard, and so like we're talking about things that we haven't talked about any of these other guys, in shape, body language, all of those things. And so that's part of it about this with Jackson Carman. It's not just that he's been bad and struggled. It's, does he care or not? And I agree with you. I think this coaching staff, they see a version of him potentially that we don't see. And that's why I don't want to straight up say he doesn't care, because I don't know for sure. And so we'll see if Jackson Carman can, at some point, turn it around regardless. Cordell Volson rightfully won the job at left guard. Up next, let's stick. I just mentioned Dax Hill. Let's stick with the safety spot. Jessie Bates, and the way the Bengals are doing a little roster management, they're going to be able to use that to their advantage as they cut down to 53 on Tuesday. But first, a word from Prize Picks, because look, if you're doing daily fantasy, you don't want to have to compete against every Joe that's doing daily fantasy. Instead, with Prize Picks, you just go up against their projection. So here's how it works. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go score in whether or not they will score more or less than the Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. So Prize Picks offers projections on any sport, obviously the NFL, NBA when it's coming up, Major League Baseball, but it's almost NFL season. So let's stick with that. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. So you don't have to worry about player injuries. You get all the benefits of daily fantasy without having to compete against a bunch of different, millions of people, thousands of people. You can do it right now with Prize Picks. So go there now, download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com, sign up and play daily fantasy sports. Fantasy first-time users will receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you deposit $100, Prize Picks going to give you $100. 50, they're going to deposit $50. It's free money. Take advantage right now by going to prizepicks.com or downloading the app and using promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100.
There is a wrinkle that when we were talking about our 53-man implications,
not in time.
I hope not in time. Okay. Isn't that would be bad for us probably as a people. We don't know. A wrinkle in roster management though for the Bengals that we didn't discuss yesterday when we were talking about takeaways from the Bengals final preseason game and the implications for the Bengals 53-man roster they have to make. And that is that exemption for Jessie Bates, who doesn't currently count against the Bengals 80 or 81-man roster and will not count until he is taken off of this exempt list, which the Bengals have at least a week left on, give or take, for the 53-man roster. That gives the Bengals some flexibility that I frankly, James, have forgotten about when going through that exercise, that maybe that's how they get that 7th wide receiver onto the roster. Maybe that's how they get that 7th corner if Cam Taylor-Britt needs to spend some time on the IR in his recovery from surgery, which we don't know about. Maybe that's how Alan George makes the team. Maybe that's how they get another player at XYZ position, tight end, running back, you name it, that maybe Darren Simmons really likes or something like that. But that is an interesting little point that gives them some maneuverability because it seems like they have some guys that are IR return candidates. And so if they can sneak those guys onto the 53 and get them onto the IR afterwards, then activate Jessie Bates, that works out to be a net neutral and helps them potentially get some guys onto the roster that otherwise would have been challenging to fit.
It was a genius move. It really was, because he wasn't going to practice last week anyways. The cut down is Tuesday. You can activate him Wednesday if you want after you make that move. So he can be full go in practice and there's no concerns or anything if you want to go that route. Or you could just wait a little bit longer. He is expected to practice this week and did some individual stuff already. So, I think he's he came back at the right time to where he's going to be able to have a full workload. At the same time, he came back to where the Bengals could kind of plan. And who knows who it is? Maybe it is Khalid Kareem. I know everyone just forgets that Khalid Kareem can be productive. Do you remember what happened in Denver last year? That ugly game in Denver? I mean, there are guys on this team, Khalid Kareem being one, that kind of go under the radar. I get it. The injuries are a major thing or a big thing that have kind of derailed his career up to this point. But I think he can be productive when healthy. So if that hamstring is going to hold him out 3 weeks, hold him out a month, put him on the roster, put him on injured reserve, bring him back when he's ready to go. You're not rushing him back. And then you're not worried about a Jeff Gunter necessarily, or you're not worried about insert whoever. I wish I could say Tyler Shelvin here, by the way, who I don't think there's a chance he makes the team based on what we saw. In fact, I think he might clear waivers and end up on the practice squad. Like, is there any belief that Tyler Shelvin is going to, but no, I think they did a good job here of roster management maneuvering, and they may wait to activate Jessie through this week just in case. And you mentioned this on our Monday show, Jake. They continue to have these, roster moves and make different moves and stuff throughout this week. It gives them some flexibility to do so because obviously Jessie Bates is going to be on the roster week 1.
Well, and they will be making those moves. So you probably keep Jessie Bates on this list as long as you can until you get your roster to the place it needs to be. So something that could very well happen is that they could keep Bates on this list, get to 53. They could put up to 3 guys on the IR. It could be Isaiah Prince. It could be Khalid Kareem. It could be Cam Taylor-Britt. There could be more that we don't know about. It could be, 3 guys to go on. Now they have a couple of spots to get somebody in. It could be that they want to make a waiver claim today. T.Y. Mcgill, I think there's periods between the T and the Y. Mcgill was released by the Vikings, was incredibly productive pass rushing interior defensive lineman. He's got an ankle injury. This could be roster acrobatics from the Vikings trying to waive a guy today so that he's harder for teams to pick up tomorrow. But if they want to make a spot to make a waiver claim today at a position where they feel like they need something, and the reason I'm highlighting Mcgill is because he's an interior pass rusher. He had 9 pressures on 29 pass rushing snaps this preseason and has a track record of doing this. He's been around the NFL for a while now. You could see something like that too, where they could put a few guys on the IR to make space for a waiver claim today. The interesting thing here about IR return is that it's with the COVID protocols changing and whatnot, it has changed. You're permitted to have 8 players return from IR. And if a player is put on the IR and returns, you can do it up to twice per season, but each time per player counts against those 8 designations. So if they've got 3 guys, Cam Taylor-Britt, Isaiah Prince, and anybody else, they need to make sure that it just is more limited this year, I think, than it has been in the past, but is more expansive than it was when the IR return was first introduced, when it was more limited. So 8 players can return.
The Bengals, well, they have to make some decisions between now and Tuesday at 4:00 Eastern. What surprises? We're going to look into our crystal ball. What surprises are coming down the pipeline? Could there be a shocker or two? Maybe the punter job. Maybe they bring in a punter that isn't even on the roster. I'm just kidding. I don't think so. Did you see the punter Denver released, by the way? Point is, we're going to get to some potential surprises that could happen on cutdown day and moving forward. Coming up next, right here on Locked On Bengals.
Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen, right? You'll end up driving below the speed limit. That's no big deal. Wrong. The truth is your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You'll not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. You got to stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, you're going to get a DUI.
All right. So I talked about some surprises, and I was joking, a little tongue-in-cheek there about the punter thing, but there are some crazy punters out there. Anyways, let's dive into this a little bit, Jake, because we kind of broke down our 53-man roster projections on our Monday show. But naturally, we're going to probably get a spot or 2 wrong, give or take, or maybe more than that, right? It's just there's always a surprise or 2. What surprises could you see happening? Maybe you're not predicting that it happens, or you don't have your 53-man roster, set up this way. But what could surprise a lot of people that might not shock you if the Bengals go that route?
Yeah, these are almost all going to be things that I'm not predicting, but could imagine. One of those is they don't think Mitchell Wilcox is ready for week 1. They're not feeling enthused about Thad Moss as tight end 3, who they're looking for a primary blocking job. They feel like both of those guys can clear waivers. Maybe these are all things the Bengals think. Maybe they were really pleased with Justin Riggs' effort as a blocker, and he scored a touchdown on top of it in that 3rd preseason game. Maybe Justin Rigg is tight end 3 for week 1. That would be, to me, a pretty big surprise, actually, if Wilcox isn't ready to go. and if Rig has leapfrogged Thad Moss, but
That's
how about Justin Rigg from the depths of the depth chart to a game day active for week 1?
Let me get you this hot take, Shane.
Yeah, send it over.
my God, he scores a touchdown in preseason game number 3 at the end, and you want a tight end 3, and I know you're not predicting it. I know you're not predicting. I get it. I understand, and he is a good blocker. Maybe he could be, show Jackson. Oh man, what did you just say? What did you just say, Jake? Don't say that stuff.
What?
Justin Rigg could show Jackson Carman.
That was me.
Thing or two. Yeah. Anyways, I like that one. That's a pretty good one.
Deep cuts.
Yeah, I mean, to me, are we sure Lamont Gilliard isn't going to make the roster? He's injured right now. He didn't play last week. I thought he was in the mix there a little bit. Could that be a surprise? Him making the roster? I could they sneak him to the practice squad? Sure. It's not like they have a ton of interior depth. They were moving him around a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say Desmond Noel. I just don't think he's there yet. I'm not going to say Devin Cochran, even though I think both guys they'd prefer to have, love to have on the practice squad.
Mm-hmm.
Gilliard's a veteran. I know. I mean, maybe that's a guy who can make it. That would be surprising to me, by the way, given how BJ Hill has played. Or Trey Hill. I wrote that.
Sorry.
Damn it. I wrote that on All Bengals too for like 2 hours. And then I looked and I was like, oh my God, BJ Hill. What am I doing?
I thought you meant like BJ Hill was having a real nice camp because he was going against Lamont Gilliard. So it'd be surprising or something.
No. I should have played it off that way. I just meant Trey Hill.
Not the logic you were working with. How about Nate Gilliam? A couple of flexible interior linemen who, if they choose to shake things up in there, Lamont Gilliard, who he was getting a lot of run early in camp, early in the preseason. He was rotating in early, and then he got hurt, which I think has happened to him a few times, unfortunately for him. But Nate Gilliam, they seem to be pretty pleased with this late addition to the roster. Played in Pittsburgh, of course, most recently. Played for 2 teams in the preseason. Not the most common occurrence, but what about Nate Gilliam if they wanted to shake things up on that offensive line? Wouldn't be – well, no, these were surprises. This would still be surprising to me.
Yeah, no, that Nate Gilliam, that would be very surprising. Let me give you one. You one. Tyler Shelvin makes the 53-man roster.
Yeah, that would be shocking.
Shocking. Here's why I could see it.
Okay.
You sure he didn't tweak something the other night?
What do you mean? You think he was hurt?
If he's not 100%, and the Bengals invested a 4th-round pick in him last year, and they don't necessarily want to cut him, man, that wrist is still bothering him a little bit. You put him on that 53-man, and you get him on one of these injured lists, and you're like, all right, let's stash him. And I know it's not that simple. He's got to have a real injury. I know that. Maybe he does.
Maybe
he does.
I would be surprised if they use a roster spot
to try
to get him onto the IR. Yeah,
it's a surprise segment.
I would be surprised. You got
me.
You got me, James. I don't know where other surprises might be. Alan George would not be like the biggest surprise if he ends up being the 53rd man. Any of those wide receivers, Irwin, Pryor, Lassiter, although Lassiter I think would surprise me more than the others, wouldn't be terribly surprising to be the 53rd man. Lassiter, I think they definitely want to keep on the practice squad. I think that he is kind of their next guy at punt returner. If Trent Taylor or something were to happen, I don't know who else. Is there anybody else, James, that you've noticed taking punt return refs? I mean, Tyler Boyd, if they need somebody to go back there and take a fair catch, I guess.
I no, there's not. So here's the surprise. The surprise is they would cut Trent Taylor and then decide, all right, we're going to find our punt returner, and someone gets released and we're going to find him there, which I just don't see happening. I think Trent's flashed enough. I think he's got that job. It would be really hard for me to see that. Other potential surprises, I would be surprised if they kept Trenton Irwin over Kwamie Lassiter, by the way. I tried to mention this. Like, there are guys in every preseason right now putting up yards, putting up numbers. It's like the NBA. Someone's got to score. Someone's got to catch the ball. It doesn't mean that they're like studs. Anyways, that goes against what I'm saying. Honestly, I would be surprised if Pryor or Lassiter made it.
Yeah.
I know that I know that sounds insane. It sounds crazy. I think they're good players with a lot of potential. They need to be refined a little bit. How many teams are going to jump at that? Like even the Falcons, who I think have one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the league, they still have guys, like enough guys to where they were like, yeah, we're cutting Auden Tate, a fan favorite in Cincinnati for years, a preseason training camp animal who put up numbers. That's the part. That's what we're talking about here. Now, would I rather have Kendric Pryor than Auden Tate? Yeah, because he can run. And in that part of it is quite intriguing. I don't know if they're going to get claimed.
And you see around the NFL, you ask any fan base, you're going to hear the same thing. Most players, and I'm going to say this for like the 17,000th time, probably since I've been doing this podcast, most players that get waived in this cut down to 53 will not be claimed to go onto another 53-man roster. There will be a few, and it has happened to the Bengals, but when you don't make that 53, it tells you that the team is comfortable taking the risk that they won't come back. And sometimes I get it wrong, but I would say it's very infrequent. Darius Hodge, by the way, got released by Miami on Monday. So just in case you were curious, I think that was the last one that we saw a lot of uproar about. Desmond Briscoe, the other one that always comes to mind for me. Sometimes these guys go out and catch on and do well elsewhere. The Bengals are not flawless. Teams make wrong decisions all the time. But it's not terribly common that you let a guy go that wasn't making your 53 and he goes on to be, a Pro Bowler or a contributor elsewhere.
Are you going to be surprised if Thad Moss makes the 53?
I think so. It's not as surprising as certainly some of the other ideas we've talked about here, but I do think it would be a little surprise. Like, I don't have that in my current 53, so I guess by definition that means it's not what I'm expecting.
Yeah. So that would be one. Noah Spence, maybe. I don't necessarily see it. Here's one. I'd be
Spence
surprised.
Would be less surprising to me for what it's worth.
Because he's been productive. If they cut Michael Thomas, the safety, I would be surprised.
I could see that happening as they did with the other Mike Thomas, we're going to bring you back in a couple of days kind of deal.
Yeah, but okay. I'd be surprised if he wasn't with the team though, on the roster. 5 safeties, he's one of them.
For at least I think that safety room is going to change a lot throughout the course of the year, for different reasons, for roster space reasons. I think at the start of the year though, I think Mike Thomas is certainly safe. But we'll see how things go as the year progresses. What about Tyson Anderson? I think he's 100% safe.
I do.
Okay.
I don't think he's done anything to, had some tackles, was productive in that third preseason game, obviously contributing on special teams. I don't necessarily think he'll be active on game day.
Yeah.
Early in the year. And that's kind of where you're at with him. But you'll develop him, and it's good to have that depth, of course.
I guess my thought process here is just, if they feel like they need a spot, maybe they feel like they can get him to the practice squad and get him back onto the roster pretty quick, or get him back onto the roster generally after some potential IR moves pretty quick if they're less comfortable exposing Mike Thomas. But I don't know. I think both of those are pretty unlikely. I think it's just the 5 safeties, especially with Jessie Bates not counting right now.
Yeah, I think you, of all these surprises and potential, and part of this, ladies and gentlemen, it is kind of difficult because there isn't many realistic surprises. We could say, oh, the Bengals trade for a tight end. Well, that could happen. Of course. They made the BJ Hill trade last year. I think they could make a trade. Will that surprise you? It wouldn't surprise me.
I almost expect a trade, so I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying that
I wouldn't go that far either.
Yeah,
I wouldn't go that far.
That's what I was about to say. I'm not necessarily like saying it's greater than 50% odds of happening, but if it does happen, to be like, yeah, that's something that is not surprising. Hard to find surprises, but I like the deep cut Justin Rigg. I like deep cuts at this part of the preseason.
Look at you. You just all aboard the Rigg train.
Well,
it's taking off. Jump on the big Rigg.
I mean, talk T.Y. Mcgill. We talked about Hoffman from the Browns the other day. We're talking deep cuts here at cut down to 53 times.
You know what you need to do, especially since you led off with Justin Rigg. You need to get that breaking news blanket out and speak it into existence. So you could tell everyone you told them so when Justin Rigg makes the 53.
Yeah, maybe one of these days I'll remember to keep my breaking news blanket handy. You have your hot take chain just like locked and loaded, ready to go.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. Maybe getting updated soon. Never know.
We'll be back tomorrow. The Bengals will make their cut down to 53. We will react to surprises. We'll talk about what some of the moves may mean, and maybe it'll just go chalk. Never does, but maybe this time. We'll talk to you then, Bengals fans. Thanks for listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.